Hi, this is Adel Meisenheimer, your executive producer of Frontline Records Rewind. I'm here today with Scott Frankfurt of the legendary Street Called Straight. Thank you for joining us today.
Legendary. Thank you, Adele.
Yes. Actually, Street Called Straight is a bit of a gem that a lot of people don't know about that was on Frontline Records with your wife, your late wife, Jody Moreing Frankfurt.
Yes.
We'll hear all about their music today, so tune in. That was World Without End by the Frontline Records group, Street Called Straight. This is Adel Meisenheimer, your executive producer, filling in for our usual host, Les Carlsen. And I'm here with part of the group, Street Called Straight, Scott Frankfurt. Welcome to the show, Scott.
Oh, thank you. It's an honor to be on it, and it's great to see you.
Thank you. You know, when I first started being introduced to the Frontline artists a few years back, I heard the Street Called Straight, and I thought, who is that vocalist? What a beautiful, beautiful voice. So I Googled, and sadly I found that Jody, her married name, Frankfurt, but her secular name, who she was famous for, and you can tell us how she was famous, was Jody Moreing.
That's right.
And I found that she had passed away, sadly, from cancer in 2006. I was devastated. But I kept searching, and I found you. And I got to find more of the story behind your beautiful partnership in writing and singing, but there's so much before that. And that's why I'm excited to have you here today to tell us the roots. How did this happen? Listeners, you're going to be so fascinated by the rich history of these two people. So take it away, Scott.
Oh, I really appreciate that. And yeah, I'm sure that there's no way to talk about Street Called Straight without understanding Jody and our relationship. And so really to understand her best is to know that her mom was a musician, kind of the San Francisco Bay Area, Fairmont Hotel. She was from that live era of musician where an artist had to be funny, they had to sing great, they had to be able to dance, they had to be able to act, do a live radio show, right on the spot and be humorous. And it was being cut to acetate live and then being distributed. So it was in the days where people could really do things, no auto-tune.
Yeah.
And so that's the musical environment that she came up in. And I think by high school, she was fascinated with songs. This is, Menlo Atherton area, which turns out it was quite a little hotbed for music at the time. She was, ironically, in a bunch of bands there. One of the bands was called Fritz. And one of the key members in Fritz was Lindsay Buckingham. Mm. So they were all up there in, Menlo Atherton High School, cranking out the folk songs and whatnot, trying to find their way, discovering music. And they had a little romance going as well. I have letters to prove it. Sorry, Lindsay, but it's the truth. And about a year after that band transformed, people were graduating and such, and Jody went on to another band. Stevie Nicks joined that band, and then that was the roots of Buckingham Nicks. So there was a lot going on right there in Menlo Atherton, and she came out of that and then started pursuing her craft on the guitar, on piano. Eventually ended up in college with a degree from Mills College, studying under Darius Milhaud.
So just to be clear, she could have been in Fleetwood Mac, is what you're saying.
According to Life magazine, anyway. That's there's a funny article about the early days of Fritz, and there's a picture of Jode, in the band, and it says the woman pictured is not Stevie Nicks. So it's pretty funny, but the truth of the matter is that those were very disciplined days for songwriters. We're talking the era of Joni Mitchell and people like that who Jody just revered. And she was a formidable musician, like I say, from that environment. And so as she grew in her craft and grew in skill, she was touring. She was doing all kinds of things. She was eventually signed to Casablanca Records. This is, let me see what year this would have been. Is this 79? It came out in 81, 79. Mm-hmm. And I believe that was Neil Bogart's label, Casablanca, at the time, and it was she had a manager, Bruce Bird, I believe, and she was married at the time to a man named Michael, who also played in the band. And also playing in that band at that time was John Debney. John Debney is the composer of all kinds of films, The Passion of the Christ, recently Jungle Book, and the list of films that he scored is immense. And he was in Jody's band, so there was all this stuff going on, like I say, from that era. Her husband, Michael, found me in a kind of a Elvis Costello rock band. I was playing the drums, and he found me at the Roxy and said, I want to introduce you to an act I'm producing. It's actually my wife, Jody. And long story short, he stole me out of that band, and I met Jody, and we were doing a synth pop trio called Trisign, which later turned into E99. And we were doing the LA club touring, little local California touring, this type of thing, on the heels of the fact that her album came out. It had a very risque song for those times called All Girls Want It. And it was getting good radio play. It was doing quite well. And then there was a backlash, and the backlash was strong, and it took the single down, and that basically was the end of that of the classic, my album was shelved. So now going back her mother, right around that time, had a stroke, became a Christian, and was praying hard for her 3 daughters and 2 sons. And Jody now, with her kind of dreams devastated, because of losing the deal or the single not being in there, and she had written dozens and dozens of songs at that time for others and herself. So she was a disciplined songwriter. She was pretty broken, and then the marriage failed. And that brought her to a place where all those prayers her mom had been laying, at the foot of the cross for her daughter, finally came to fruition, and Jody came to know the Lord. Now, she and I were pretty close at the time because we were writing songs for publishers and such, alongside all of our pursuits with the band. So as that started to happen, exactly at that time, we got one of those classic experiences. We're at Madame Wong's West doing our synth pop set, and in walks the guy with the cigar and the Rolls Royce. He says, "I like that 4th song, Nobody Wins. I want that for a new artist. You're going to hear about her in about a year." And we're like, "Yeah, right, dude, right." So we go down the parking lot, Wilshire Boulevard, wherever, and we get in his Rolls. He had a Rolls. He wasn't lying. And so we were like, okay, well, maybe we'll talk to him a little longer.
Right.
And so, and he said, "I've got this girl. Her name is Tiffany. She's, I think at the time she was 14 or 15. She says she's going to be a huge star in about a year. Are you willing to meet with me, and maybe we change the title of that song and we do it for her?" And so there was some reluctance, but we got together. Long story short, that song ended up on Tiffany's debut album and kind of sealed the deal on, yes, we're real songwriters now. And I think it did about 11 million units worldwide, probably about 4 million in the U.S. that summer.
Oh.
Yeah, it was a big song.
What's the title of that song?
Danny.
Okay.
Nobody Wins in parentheses.
Okay.
Yeah, it's on the first record. We had a really interesting run with George Tobin in those days, and we did a lot of publishing work. And eventually it was clear that there was a big change in our personal lives. Like I say, we fell in love. We were about to get married. Now we have this song that's charting, and now there's a little bit of money. I mean, I was selling drumsticks just to buy food, so it was clearly welcome. And she's now divorced and in her own apartment now, and so we were struggling on one hand, but we had the success, and now she's saved. I am completely as unsaved as it gets because I'm coming from a very kind of Frank Zappa mindset of the problem with religion is that people have books and they believe in the books, and that's why they go to war and that's why they kill each other. And that was basically Frank's mantra, and I bought into it 100% because I was a card-carrying humanist. But I loved her, and her lyrics were changing, the music was changing. And so even though we had submitted some songs to George that were these kind of in-between strange, moral songs, warning songs, warning about this. They weren't Christian songs, but they were clearly songs that were aiming at a little more of a critical acclaim than this is not the pop single you were hoping you were going to get from us.
Yeah.
And so, but that was a really good time for us to, quite frankly, just figure out who we were. We didn't know we had to figure it out, but it was happening all very quickly, and now I know why. And so one day, not to be, ridiculously graphic, but I'm lying next to Jode and I'm reading my Bible thinking, I don't think we're supposed to be doing this. And it's because she challenged me to read it, and I'm raised a Jewish boy, from the Valley. And so for me, it was absolutely not. But because I love you, I'll at least, it'd be intellectually honest to at least read the book instead of just taking Frank's word for it. Mm-hmm. So read the book, got to Isaiah 50 and change, and realized, oh, this is why my Reformed Jewishness feels so awkward, because there's this huge, dividing line in history between the person of, life if you believe this way about Christ, and life if you believe that way about Christ. And all of a sudden it made a lot of sense to me. Okay, this is what's going on in the Middle East. This is what's going on in human history. And that part of it clicked, but there really wasn't still really much going on in my heart. And then I kept reading, and then I was watching Fred Casey Price one Sunday morning, and for whatever reason, it was Fred that explained the gospel to me, and I believed him. And so I continued to read the book, and anyway, we cleaned up our domestic situation, and then that was really the beginning of all right, we can't write, perform, do music like we've been doing it because it doesn't. There's no integrity in it. We didn't have any sense as songwriters that we were writing about anything we cared about. Pardon me. And the authenticity thing was always really big with Jody and myself. And so we strived anyway to try to, always do good work. And when that translated into our hearts changing and translated into the words starting to take over our hearts, there was the lyrics just completely went into a new direction. And we called KKLA and said, "Hi, we're new believers. We don't know what to do, where to go to church. I'm a Jewish guy. She's a rock star. What do we do?" And they gave us, a choice of 3 or so churches, and we went to a couple of them. I'm completely have no context, so I walked right into a stone cold Pentecostal situation, and it was awesome, but I didn't understand what was happening, and I just wanted to understand the book, Yeah. And so anyway, long story short, there was at that time I was living behind Grace Community Church in Sun Valley. And I actually hated that church because all those people always parked in front of my place, and I'm getting home at 2 in the morning or whatever. And it's like they're waking me up in the morning. I will never go into that building, right? And so needless to say, that was the third one on the list. Hey, why don't you, since you're in the neighborhood, why don't you go over to Grace Community? So of course we sat right in the very last row, giant place. We sat in the absolute last row we could. But when I heard him teaching the Bible, it's like exactly what I needed because I had this belief, but I didn't know what the word was about, what it said. And
a pastor of Grace Community.
John MacArthur. And he is still our pastor to this day. I love that man very much. And there's no doubt that God must have had quite a smile, when I was, basically cursing him, saying, those people over there. And then I was, for 18 years, Joe and I ministered there, grew there, learned we had our life there, So anyway, so that's what's happening. All of these new things. We're in a Sunday school now. And just randomly, as I had never sung a worship song in my life, but because we're musicians, of course, were approached. It's now time to, this is a song called Lord, I Lift Your Name on High. We want you to play this on Sunday. It's like, it's called what? And so we figured out how to play it. And then we met, who's now one of my best friends, the pastor at the time in our Sunday school, John Zimmer. He saw my long hair down to here and saw Jode's, flaming red hair out to here and said, I want to get to know those people. And he kind of grabbed us and he gave us a shot. So then we started, growing in the Lord. We started learning the importance of worship and just starting our Christian walk, as a young couple, kind of semi-freaked out from the music business, but with, some moderate success starting to brew. And a girl came up to us after one of our sets and said, by the way, I heard you're shopping at tape, because we were called the Vapors at this time. Because we thought, well, life is a vapor and we're vapors. And so we've got this new thing going. Let's be the Vapors. So we put 4 songs on there. I think it was like Rose of Sharon, World Without End, Countdown to Eternity, something like that, if I'm remembering it right. And handed it to this sweet, sweet gal in our Sunday school, who hands it straight to her friend, who turns out to be Mike McLean at Frontline Music Group. And he hands it off to Brian Tong, and Brian heard it and really liked it and contacted us. And
also at Frontline, yes.
Yes, I think he was the president of FMG at the time. And so that began the story. That's how we ended up in Christian music at all. It was simply because there was this ginormous spiritual change in 2, hopeful rock stars' lives, and he completely rearranged our DNA. Yeah. And then in a way, gave us an opportunity to continue to find an expression, a sublime way now of expressing our skill set, and being able to use it somehow and we didn't know how exactly, but we were able to, start that walk, that journey there.
What do you think the first song that Brian Tong at Frontline Records fell in love with that you guys wrote in that batch as the Vapors?
Well, Brian wrote us a letter, basically a love letter. It was so sweet. It was so sweet. And he's such a good man. And he was particularly struck by a ballad called Rose of Sharon. The lyric is very poignant. The harmony is very poignant. And that's I think, the one that caught his ear. Because, again, I think at that time there weren't a lot of pop acts on the label. The label was known, as I knew it, for being this cutting-edge place where artists that you would never expect to be speaking about the gospel or speaking about Jesus or God or anything spiritual, the genre that they were doing it in was very hard. It was very cutting edge. It was leading edge. And at that time, a heavy metal Christian artist, a rap Christian artist, a post-punk apocalyptic Christian artist, or in our case, kind of an edgy, a little hyper creative Prince meets the Eurythmics synth freak out music. That's basically what we were doing. But we loved pop hooks and we loved melodies. But we were not. We respected the formula. We loved the formula, but we were really just trying to have fun and try to see how good we could be, I guess.
Yeah.
So Rose of Sharon got it started.
Yeah, let's play that. Here we go. Rose of Sharon off the first Street Called Straight album, self-titled Street Called Straight.
Someday we'll be together, face to face and eye to eye. I know then you'll tell me every reason why. I'll bow before you as my life becomes complete, and take the crowns of glory and place them at your feet. Then I'll go to my rose of Sharon. When I go to my rose, he's my father. Oh, my rose. When I go,
At frontlinerecords.us, we have all kinds of goodies. Artist bios, links to all the music, and a free music offering when you sign up for the newsletter. Check it out, frontlinerecords.us. So you and Jody land a record deal.
Yes.
How old are you at this time?
I am 25, 28. Thank you.
Got some help from the audience.
Thank you.
28, yes.
I was 28. Now, a little bit of this story is that Jody was, relatively speaking, considerably older than me. She was 14 years my senior, so that made her 42. And so we never felt that. Our whole marriage, we never felt the age difference. We were very simpatico on music and in life and in ministry and all of that. But it definitely, I mean, it may sound strange to say, but in a way, the records that we made 4 of them plus a bunch of singles. They were kind of our kids. That was our passion. That's where we were devoted, is expressing ourselves, that way. And again, we didn't know a lot about touring. We didn't, Brian and the team at FMG was trying to help us, but we were coming at it from, I think, more the publishing side. Mm-hmm. So I know Brian was looking at us for songs. And so we were cranking out songs and making these albums as good as we could. And and that led us to, a period of growth as songwriters where I think Jody, she primarily did the lyrics. She primarily wrote the germ of the songs at this point. In our secular days, we were more 50-50. But I was so fascinated with sound design. We were surviving on sound design on the side. Mm-hmm. So I became kind of a synth programmer guy and had a long run in technology. And that was really good for us because I could focus on the track and my production craft and just keep aiming at that. And then she could focus on the song and what God was doing in her life and how ministry was coming into her and then flowing back out in this creative way. And I just loved that. I always felt that there was, her voice just had a tone to it that, I just really, I was enamored by, and I always thought it read well. Like, It may not be the most whatever type of voice, but it is definitely, you cannot mistake that that's Jode. You can tell it's her within a bar. And I've always felt that that's what makes the artist interesting, you know. So the best word I can use is fascinated by her sound and her artistry. I was always a huge fan of what she could do. So that spurred me on to just go after the technology and everything I could do to try to keep up with her,
right?
And see if I could bring something good to her really cool songs.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about more of that too, because you did some very groundbreaking type of technical things in your recordings. But before we get past that, I believe that you said that the song "Reconciled" was a testimony of sort of this journey you've just expressed to us. Can you tell us more about "Reconciled" and how that came together?
Yeah. Reconciled was kind of that synth digital, high energy approach, but there's so much joy and so much excitement going on. When Jody penned the lyric, I think I might have written the bridge, so I'm credited on this song, but it was Jode's song, and it's based on Colossians 1:20, and on the run and burning with rebellion, you shook me to my knees, left me crying, truth like thunder crashing through me. That's Jode's reflection of like, all right, God just rolled over me, and on the lyric goes, I was blind, rushing through the darkness. Now you've chosen me, your compassion, tender mercies, new every morning. It's concise, it's spiritual, but it's poetic, and I always love that about how she's done that. So then the chorus, or the bridge, he has now reconciled me to himself. He made peace through the blood of the cross. So it was a very, very much the theme in our thinking, as we're trying to figure out how to express this Christianity that's taken over our lives.
Yes. Well, let's let listeners hear that. Put the music with the lyric that you just read. Thank you so much for doing that. Here's "Reconciled," Street Called Straight. So here you are. So we got a taste of Jody's lyric, and you're putting this new, kind of some high-tech stuff in here. You're one of the first producers, artists to go completely, I want to say digital, as opposed to some tape running around in the room.
That's
right?
fair. That's fair.
Tell us about it.
Sure. I had an interesting survival job, if you will, which was that I got into the synth industry kind of by accident. I was programming a drum machine when drum machines first came out. I kind of got noticed I was working retail and selling stuff, and I was doing pretty well. I got sent back for training to a company called Ensoniq, which was an American manufacturer of synthesizers back in the day. They had a sampler, and in all of my, proud vibes, I walked in there and said, "You've got a great synth here, but your sounds aren't any good and you need me to fix it." And for some reason they bought it and gave me a job. And so I'm their West Coast consultant now for then 10 years. I had a 10-year run, and my job was to go and take our technology to major artists in Los Angeles. Like, go sample George Duke's piano. Go sample Paul Jackson Jr.'s guitar. Go sample this one and that one. Here's Earth, Wind, and Fire. Go get Verdine's bass, and go get, at that time Maurice was alive, so I got to sample Kalimbas from Maurice White and them singing. Go sample Chicago and meet all the guys in Chicago. And so I had this calling card that how many, people in their 20s have that kind of a break. And so I had brand new technology in my hands. I was meeting the right people, and I was pretty good at it and just fascinated with it. So I had more tools at that time and a really good understanding of analog and digital synthesis. And so back then, you had maybe 4 tracks max you could play back from a computer. Tape ruled the earth back then. And there was something called FSK, time. It wasn't time code, but it was this thing you could sync to. So you could take like a Commodore 64 or an Atari 1040 ST, and you could send a tone to a tape deck. The tone would come back to the computer. This is Nerdville warning. The tone would come back to the Atari or whatever you had, and it would synchronize now to the tape machine. That meant you could use MIDI to talk to all your synthesizers, all your drum machines, et cetera, and they would sync to the tape. So you could put the stuff you had to put on tape, like vocals, but you could have this digital palette behind you. And at that time, that was not easy to do. It was a little quirky, and we're talking the era of floppy disks. So I had a box this big. Let the record show I'm making about a 2 foot 2 foot shape, and there was probably 100 floppy disks in there that would represent one song, because you'd have to load every sampler, and then you'd have to load up all the drum machines, and they all had floppies, and then you could play that from the computer and get a first generation. You didn't even have to hit tape. You could just go straight to your master. Now, with the exception of recording direct to vinyl, there was no way to do that back then, to get that first generation onto a disc. So all the excitement about compact disc being digital and all of that, all the manufacturers were offering instruments that had MIDI, and that was just my wheelhouse. I mean, I could sync that stuff up, and you can hear how mechanical some of these grooves are, like all the music in the late '80s, was, except the rock stuff. But I mean, all the synth pop stuff was very quantized and very drum machiney and all that. And I was a drummer, so I was a legit drummer. So I bought into the drum programming all the way, and so that allowed us to, I'll never forget dragging on for our first record. We took our budget, we went down in the mixing lab, which was Frontline's studio, and I took, like that picture I showed you with all the gear, basically I took all of this down there and over one cable synchronized it to a tape deck, kind of like that, so that even though they were running their tape that would run their console and such, all of that stuff was live. So it was a little crazy, but we also had the first sound tools, Pro Tools, with like a couple of digital tracks. So we recorded Jody's vocal to digital, and then all the music was running live off of the instruments, going straight to master. So it was pretty unheard of back then. I mean, there were people doing it, but at this level, to take everything without really hitting tape ever. There was just no noise on these records, and that was at the time that was pretty hard to pull off. You know, nowadays, of course, analog and digital is a great thing.
Yeah.
You know, using the best of both. But back then, it was like, woo, DDD. I got the DDD on my CD, and that was no question. It was a marketing point at the time, and it was definitely a part of our sound. Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's what I appreciate about Frontline artists is there's a lot of pioneering, you might want to say
no
artists,
doubt.
and I feel like you were definitely one of those pioneers in that particular field of technology. I mean, it's amazing. Who would have thought, you know, a Street Called Straight album, one of the first
Exactly.
digitally recorded
That's right.
albums
That's right.
ever. What song on this first album in 1991 it's released do you think represents that technology the best?
That's a great question. I think I would say, well, of course, you heard World Without End. That being the single, that had a lot of punch and a lot of clarity. But I think something like, there's a wonderful Aretha Franklin kind of tribute in a song called Think that Jode refashioned. And that one has, again, a very telltale quality to the message is pointed. It's a little... Another one of Jody's warning songs. You better think about it, you know, and borrowing from Aretha and all that stuff. It has got a little tongue-in-cheek in it. But yeah, sonically, for sure, it was a good representation of the marriage of what I was doing and what she was doing. Yeah, the lyric for Think is, I saw it coming in your eyes. You were heading for a compromise, and they don't come for free. And now the love you understand is measured in ounces and milligrams. Don't let it choose your destiny. You better think. Can you hear the thunder? There are no guarantees when you're messing with your eternity. So that type of theme.
Yes. Excellent. All right. Here's some awesome lyric and production to go with it. A song called Think, Street Called Straight.
You better know which side you're on. I saw it coming in your eyes. You were headed for a compromise. They don't come for free. And now the love you understand is measured in ounces and milligrams. Don't let it choose your destiny. Oh, you better think. Oh, can't you hear the thunder? There are no guarantees when you're messing with your eternity. Better think. Don't let it pull you under. Today you made it on your own, but tonight you might not make it home. We're living in a combat zone, ducking and dodging every storm, and running like refugees. You better know whose side you're on, 'cause the battle line's already drawn, and they're the kind that you can't see. Oh, you better think. Can't you hear the thunder? There are no guarantees when you're messing with your eternity. Better think. Don't let it pull you under. Today you made it on your own, but tonight you might not make it home. You better know which side you're on. You better think. About the right thing. You better think. About the right thing. Oh, and we're dodging every storm. Oh, the line's already drawn, are you on anyway? Think about it. Why, you could pick up a book. Maybe the Bible. Think about it.
This has been so great to be with you today, Scott.
Really, really enjoyable. Thank you, Adele.
Thank you for telling us all about your heritage. And Jody, how everyone misses her, but her music lives on. And there's going to be part 2. We get to cover some more of your music. So hang on, listeners, and check out part 2.